was the last time you knowingly had a meal with Jesus? Anyone? When was the last time you unknowingly had a meal with Jesus? Who had breakfast? That's probably when it happened. Can you imagine, well, first of all, I can't imagine walking 7 miles at a time, but can you imagine walking for 7 miles, talking to someone, and not know who they were? Can you imagine that? I noticed that the disciples, or at least the scriptures don't tell us that the disciples even asked the person's name or, who are you? They said, are you the only person who apparently wasn't watching their news feed for the last 3 days? Didn't know what was going on in the big picture. But they walked along and they chatted away, and they had no idea who they were talking to. Now, have you ever done that? I will be honest, I have. That may surprise all of you that I would just talk to a complete stranger for 7 miles, but there you have it. But can you imagine, as somebody said, the minute I start talking, you'd know it was me. The minute I start moving my hands around and talking, you'd all know it was me. But Jesus was talking to them and they still didn't know. What does that tell us about the resurrection? We have other stories. I believe last week was the story about the disciples and Thomas in the upper room and Jesus coming, and they weren't sure, and Thomas said, not till I get to do something in particular will I believe. Because when Jesus first appeared, they didn't recognize him. Now Jesus is appearing again, and they don't recognize him. So something must have happened in his resurrection that made him different in some way. And we don't know what it is. There are other stories that the disciples are out on the lake in Galilee and they're fishing because they've given up and figured, well, it's all over. And Jesus is on the beach and he calls to them. And then all of a sudden, Peter realizes who it is and he dives in the water. He can't swim, by the way. Dives into the water and heads for shore. What changes in the resurrection? Is it Jesus who's changed, or is it us? Or are some of these stories about not recognizing the risen Christ about how we need to work on that? Mary Magdalene doesn't recognize him when she's in the garden and thinks he's the gardener. He arrives in the upper room and the disciples don't know who it is. He walks along that road and the disciples don't know who it is. Would it be that we weren't expecting him? They know what Jesus told them. Jesus said, I will be raised. In 3 days I will rise again. 3 days later, when Jesus sees and encounters those who were his closest companions, they don't recognize him. They're not expecting to actually see him again. They race to the tomb after the women say it's empty, thinking somebody's taken away the body. Not that the body's been raised. There had to be angels there to tell the women, no, he's not here. He's been raised just like he said. We're not expecting to actually encounter the risen Christ. Think about your days. When was the last time you actually expected to encounter the risen Christ? Where were you? What were you doing? We don't expect it, even now. I can assure you that if you spend any time in the hospital, you will encounter the risen Christ at least once. I expect that as you're walking down the street, you've encountered the risen Christ and you didn't know it. In the Jewish tradition, they would leave an empty place at the Seder meal. The Elijah cup, they would call it. That's the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper. For Elijah might return. And they needed to have a place for Elijah. And I remember one time being at my grandparents' and there was an empty place at the table, but it was all set. And I said, oh, who didn't come? And for whatever reason, that particular day, my grandmother had set an extra place just in case. And it was just after I'd heard about the Elijah cup. And I said, are we expecting Jesus today? And she said, well, wouldn't that be nice? Do we even leave a place for Jesus to join us? When you're walking down the street, are you looking at anybody or anything? As someone who drives a lot, I drive down the street near crosswalks with my foot on the brake because most people just walk out because they're paying attention to something else. If you're doing that and you're so totally immersed in something else, you can't expect to see the risen Christ. You're likely to walk right on by. And the risen Christ comes in unexpected ways and places. Our job, like I said to the young people, is to be ready and watching. Look for the risen Christ around you. Sunday mornings, I invite you to share peace of Christ after we light the candle, because that light is echoed in each one of you. The risen Christ is right here. At least once a week, you have the opportunity to encounter the risen Christ. Isn't that an amazing opportunity? And like the people on the road to Emmaus, shared together, we open the scriptures, we learn more together, and then we can go and share. It was already nighttime, and they got up and ran 7 miles back to Jerusalem to say, guess what happened? You know what I'm going to ask next, right? When was the last time you left here, ran out the door, and go, guess what I heard today? That's what they did. But they did it at night. Not an easy or safe thing to do back then. Where are you going to look for the risen Christ? And where are you going to go and share that the risen Christ is right here? For Christ lives in each one of us, and we have the opportunity each and every day to allow, through us, someone else to meet the risen Christ. Go walk the road and be Christ among us. Amen.